This is The Coolest Show, brought to you by Hip Hop Caucuses. Think 100%.
It's the coolest show, you know, keep the culture connected. It's the coolest show, you know, in your ear, yeah, respected. Expert level information, entertainment, education. Rev Yearwood got you covered as you hit your destination. Climate rules everything around me. Cream. For those who lost focus, close your eyes and just dream. Open your third eye, now the world is your off. Coolest show, you know, it's the Hip Hop Caucus.
Welcome to the coolest show. I'm so glad we're still here in my home state of Louisiana, and we're here at the Woodland Plantation. We've had some amazing conversations, and this one actually is one that is special because one of the producers from the coolest show is going to join me in this conversation because of this person who is our guest, and that is none other than Mary Heglar. How are you, Mary?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
It's good.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
Since we talked, and since we last talked, I was so proud of you when you did something many of us can't do. And you hit me up and you says, Rev, I'm going to be leaving my big green child. And I'm going to be going out there on faith. So, and then I look up and I see the book. It looks like you're doing well. And we're obviously so proud because it's such an important thing for us to leave those environments to go out on faith. It looks good. But how does it feel?
I regret nothing, but if we think that I walked out on book money, that's not true. Book publishing doesn't pay nearly enough for me to take that leap of faith. I'm also doing communications consulting, so I'm working more with some more frontline groups on building messaging and narrative structures and communications departments. So
no, that's excellent. I actually know I also work with Beyond Petrochemicals, so I know that's one of the things that's also very important in this regard. But before I get that, and I want to make sure Tamar Toes O'Laughlin is here, one of our producers. Some of you haven't known, I've been doing these conversations, have been yelling out at the end of it to our producers, did I miss any questions? So I literally said, we're going to put one on the couch right now so we can
It's a nice couch.
It is a nice couch. But for those, since it's Mary been on the show before, you can go, actually be good. You should go listen to what she said before about who is Mary Heglar. But who is Mary Annalise Heglar?
Oh, you're asking me?
I am asking you.
Oh, I was not prepared for that question.
It's a great question, actually.
It is. I'm stalling. I guess I am first and foremost a writer, mostly been known as an essayist, now newly minted writer, children's book writer, novelist. And also, I'm originally from Birmingham, Alabama, grew up halfway in Fayette and Port Gibson, Mississippi, graduated from Pineywood School in Mississippi. And now I live in New Orleans.
Where did you go to college?
I went to Oberlin.
I do. I see. I knew that, but I wanted to make sure that I wanted to shout out
Oberlin College?
I'm not actually doing the commencement at Oberlin College. Side note.
I think that was a pitch, Oberlin. In case you missed it, he's available.
No. So if you're listening, if you probably just heard, I did my son's commencement. Hopefully you listened to that episode at Portsmouth College. I'm very blessed to be asked to be going to Pineywood. And I'm so excited about that. But Mary went there. And so we have a conversation offline about how, the audacity of me being there. And so my plug now is for those listening that please make sure that very soon this amazing graduate of Pineywood is up there in her gown. You have a gown? Are you ready to, you have the regalia ready to go?
I'll get it.
Okay.
Yeah. Also, when at Pineywood, I was the first 8th grader in Snoopy Hall. If you've gone to Pineywood, you know what that means.
There it is.
And she's a Scorpio, so that was a veiled threat, but it wasn't veiled that much.
It's funny.
There was no veil.
So I went to do the commencement, and the hat didn't fit at Portsmouth College.
Oh.
And so they had to put, you probably noticed, they put
a tassel.
A tassel on a baseball cap.
That's amazing.
That was amazing, though. It's something that that actually was a kind of some schools get real tight.
It seems like you might need to embroider just a commencement cap.
No.
That way you could bring your own.
You have a hat for everything. How do you not have a hat?
You just need a commencement hat.
I will get one now.
Yeah.
I need to get
Since
one.
now you're on the commencement circuit, just
I'm on the
speaking to
commencement.
everybody.
It's like the chitlin circuit, except they pay money.
Yeah.
On that note, you have a question for Mary. Sophie.
We always ask about your community. As someone who has been in this work in many ways, public and private, for a good part of your life, can you talk about the community that you reach through all the ways that you are sending your message of love out into the work?
About the community that I've built since I've been in the climate space. I think that shifted a bit. For a good while, that community was online, and I've become much less online over the past couple of years. So it's been more about wanting to build deep relationships with other people working toward climate justice, but in particular, other Black people, in particular, other Black women, other Black Southern people. It's a little bit unfortunate because so much of my work is solitary. I've been working from home, I'm a writer, and so a lot of it is just like being holed up with my computer and trying not to be distracted. So sometimes that gets in the way of the ability to make community, but I do my best.
Well, speaking of that, I heard you and your work wife got back together. So sometimes you get out. Podcast. Can you let folks know?
Well, that's not really getting out because Amy is based in Costa Rica. And even the whole time, Amy Westervelt and I, Amy is an investigative journalist, and she and I launched the Hot Take podcast together a while ago. It's about a media criticism podcast, kind of silly, kind of serious at the same time, about the ways that we talk or don't talk about climate change. The whole time we were doing Hot Take, we never once did Hot Take in the same room. She was in California, I was in New York or in Louisiana, or after she moved to Costa Rica, she was in Costa Rica. And just recently, we launched Spill, which is kind of like a spinoff of Hot Take. It is even less structured than Hot Take because we're trying to make it easy enough to fit into our lives, which have changed dramatically since we were doing Hot Take. And it's also for the overflow of episodes that Amy has from Drill. So every episode is not us talking. There's an episode of us every month, once a month. And then the rest of it is overflow stories from the Drill feed.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's exciting. And I know for the many, many people who loved Hot Take, this is really good news. Like I saw the 17 people who didn't leave Twitter. And then they told people and they came back because that was pretty exciting. There's so many people who were excited to have you back, and the pointed yet hilarious questioning that comes with the podcast. You started to talk a little bit about the children's book, which I have read to my son once a week because he asked to see it because the hair looks like his hair.
That makes me really happy.
Yes.
The children's book is called The World is Ours to Cherish. It was written as a letter to my nephew. I wrote it, there were two things going on. One was that I just finished polishing up the novel so it could go out on submission, meaning go to different publishing houses, see if somebody wants to buy it. That's a very nerve-wracking period, and you kind of need something to do with yourself while that's going on. And also, it was the winter of 2021 in New York. I had been over New York for a while. I was ready to go. I was wildly homesick for the South. And I realized that I couldn't stay anymore. And so I did two things. I started writing the children's book because my nephew also lived in New York, and I was realizing if I got up and moved to the South, then when he started asking questions about climate change, I might not be there. And the other thing I did was I signed up for driving lessons because that was the other thing that had kept me in New York for such a long time. I did not plan for that book to come out at the same time as the novel or within months of the novel, but just worked out that way. And it makes me really happy that your son likes to see the hair textures because that was something I insisted with my publisher. When I got the first draft of drawings of the children's book, they did a really good job of including different skin tones, different phenotypes, but all the hair was straight. And I was like, I need to see different hair textures. And so,
Yay. It's important for us to see us. So.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
No, it's critical. So I'll tell you this in private, and I'm saying this now, obviously, publicly. I think that you are obviously an amazing author and writer,
Thank you.
and very important. It's interesting because in our movement today, obviously we always get thrown back into what was done with, the 20th century, what they did and how, and we know that they had prolific authors of the civil rights movement. We sometimes don't see as much of that now. We see some, and we see a lot of, I see a lot of folks, what I mean by that, I see a lot of people who are writing, obviously, climate books. There's a ton of environmental climate books out, the back of the bus, so to speak, but really from us. And those Dr. Bullard talks all the time about how he's written like 19 books.
Yes.
And this and that. But from the standpoint of us using that as a mechanism of change, not sure I see as many in a way that's, lifting up. How do you feel?
Yeah, well, I feel like there actually are a lot of writers who are writing in the same vein as the writers who were contemporary to the civil rights movement. I think we do have a lot of artists in that vein. I think of Jesmyn Ward, Kiese Layman, and there's so many others. And I do see climate change as a theme in a lot of their work, but it's just not as explicit. But so many other political issues are, so many other social justice issues are. So I would say that tradition hasn't gone away, but we could use more writers who are being more explicit about climate change. However, I also think that writers are usually artists, and to ask an artist to when I'm writing my novel, I'm not trying to use it as a mechanism for change. I'm trying to use it to make art. I'm trying to use it to tell a story. I'm using it to express myself. I think, when you're like, I'm going to write a novel so I can affect this specific change, you're writing a protest novel, which is a genre in and of its own. But that's generally not what most writers want to do, not what most artists want to do. It definitely wasn't what I set out to do. But I do see Black people engaging with climate change, but we engage with climate change much in the same way that we encounter it, which is that it doesn't show up as this thing that comes down from the sky and says, "Hello, I am climate change," or this big theory that sits off on a horizon. It shows up in every time I hear Black people say Cancer Alley, they're talking about climate change. Every time I hear them say BP oil spill, they're talking about climate change. Or Hurricane Katrina, they're talking about climate change. So to go back to Jesmyn Ward, she had a whole novel about Salvage the Bones, which is about Hurricane Katrina. That is about climate change. Her next novel, I'm forgetting the name of it, is actually my favorite, Sing Unburied Sing. That talks about the BP oil spill. That is a climate change novel, right? Climate or environmentalism is so innate in us that we don't necessarily need to give it a name. So I think we are talking about it and engaging with it without specifically announcing that we are.
That's beautiful. And the reason that's such an important thing you're bringing up is that we've been working a lot with, I think, the Hollywood Climate Summit. Yeah. We're working a lot with Anna Jane Joyner, right, and Good Energy, and talking about the screenwriters and writers and creating content. And one of the things we're trying to figure out, obviously there's concepts that don't look up, and something that are explicit that had been around climate. And what you're saying is that in storytelling, maybe we need to tell more stories. We actually, not you said, we tell more stories that are connected, but are like Beasts of the Southern Wild and other things like that, that allow for us to tell our story in a way that doesn't it's not explicit.
It's not preachy.
It's not preachy. Explain that, because I know what that means.
It's just in life.
Yeah.
But it's important because the people, the thing though is that when Hollywood or people are doing movies, right, and they say, "Hey, Rev, where are these movies that and they grab this, right, which we're going to talk about the book, and when to the movie, then they'd be like, "Oh, this isn't a climate narrative. We need something that's going to about how much carbon is in the atmosphere."
Yeah, they're looking for white coats and emissions, and then they don't want to talk about it because they don't understand those things. And you're saying it's not that deep. You could literally touch it.
The point of a story is you're trying to feel something, both as the creator and you want your audience to feel something. Nobody feels spreadsheets. Nobody feels charts and projections. What they feel is the actual storm. And that doesn't take, you can talk about how that feels without showing somebody, all right, and this is what the temperature of the Gulf was, and right? Like, you don't need all of this extra information to understand what this is, right? Like, people don't understand gravity like that.
That's right.
But they stay on the ground. You don't see people over-explaining gravity. And that, I don't remember who it was. I think it was somebody that I probably hate in politics who said that.
That's a big group.
Yeah, there's a lot of people. I think it was Ronald Reagan who said that if you're explaining, you're losing. But one thing that we can absolutely learn from our opponents, they know how to control a narrative. And they've known how to control a narrative for a very long time. And I think what we fail to understand in climate spaces is that our opponent is not new.
That's right.
It's not new to this. So I'm going to skip ahead to talking about Troubled Waters a little bit. So Troubled Waters is about the climate generation and the civil rights generation.
For folks who,
my new novel, Troubled Waters, is about the climate change generation and the civil rights generation and things that go unsaid between them. And the civil rights narrative is about school desegregation in Nashville, Tennessee, which is part of my true family history. My aunt integrated the schools in Nashville, Tennessee, or was part of the cohort that did that in 1957. I say all that to say, getting back to what I was saying earlier, that as I was doing the research for this novel, I went through so many articles from 1957 and the lead up to it and what it actually was, how it was represented in the news. And the same sorts of bad faith arguments that we see in climate, you saw them then. Right? Like, there were arguments that if we move too fast, we will disintegrate society. Have you heard that before? If we move too fast off of fossil fuels, we'll disintegrate society. Or
every single cop.
Exactly. It was considered a mental condition for Black people to want integration. People were actually institutionalized for that and probably tortured.
Yes.
But then you go back to like 2014, and I was hearing stories of people who were diagnosed as bipolar because they thought climate change was real. So maybe not 2014, that was more like 2006. But it's the same sorts of arguments used over and over and over again. And Amy and I just recorded a podcast that was about a lot of the research that couldn't go into this book because I'm telling the story from the perspective of a child, and there were just things that she wouldn't have known. So we talked through some of that research. And I say that because Amy explains in great detail how school desegregation was kind of like a marinade for the types of climate denial and fights against climate that we have today.
And Christian nationalism and everything else that we have currently.
Yeah. And also that idea that like, oh, you should wait. That was big in school desegregation. Nashville proposed to just like create 3 different school systems at one point. That was their last ditch effort to get away from
denial, division.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We'll have a Black one, a white one, and an integrated one.
Yeah.
Like they wanted to do anything but integrate.
Well, I want our audience to know that we're going to go into a segment here. I want to give Mary just the floor. This moment actually is very important. I'm not sure when you're listening to this, but when we recorded this, as we're recording it now, today actually is the 70th anniversary of Brown v. Board of Education decision on May 17th, 1954. And so I am excited for you to read from that. And also where we're sitting is at the Woodland Plantation, the site of the 1811 slave uprising. So all of that in this amazing moment, I want to turn over to Mary to read from her new novel.
Yeah. Before I read, I'll give a little bit of context. So the 1954 decision was the one that decided that separate is inherently unequal.
Yes.
Then in 1955, because the South dragged their feet, there was a second decision that said that with all deliberate speed, they had to integrate. In 1955, there was a cohort of Nashville parents from every single grade, high school, middle school, elementary school, that tried to take their children to school to integrate the schools. and they were turned away. I found out in my research, I did not know this before, my mother was one of those.
Wow.
My grandfather tried to integrate with my mother because she was the oldest, so she was the 5-year-old in 1955. And they were turned away. That turned into a lawsuit. That lawsuit prompted the city of Nashville to say, okay, we're going to keep them separate. We're going to actually make them equal. And they actually invested a lot into Black schools at that point. They built new schools. They renovated them. They hired a bunch of Black teachers. They got school buses.
As a diversion.
As a diversion.
Okay.
Actually, one of the schools that was built as a result of that was Cameron High School, which is where my mother went to high school, and she loved that high school. My aunt, too. But eventually, they came up with all these other ways to try to delay. And then in 1957, they couldn't delay anymore. So they announced something called the Nashville Plan. And the Nashville Plan was they would integrate the first grade in 1957, then the second grade, then the third grade. And it was so effective at delaying full integration that other cities eventually adopted that plan.
Yep.
Also, in 1956, the very first school to integrate under Brown versus Board of Education was integrated in Clinton, Tennessee. It was incredibly, incredibly violent. And then in 1957, Nashville was as far as I and the archivist I worked with can find, was the first elementary school to integrate under Brown versus Board of Education. And it was both Clinton and Nashville were kind of knocked out of our collective memory because at the same time Nashville integrated first grade, Little Rock was integrating high school. And that became so much more violent also because the kids are bigger and they can be more violent, which was also true in Clinton, but the Arkansas governor was wild crazy. Tennessee wanted to maintain its idea of being like the Athens of the South. We're not like those Deep South backwards folks. So they wanted to keep it cute. And when the Arkansas governor brings in the National Guard to keep the Black kids out, that headline just knocks everybody else out of the water. But Nashville deserves to be remembered too, and it was incredibly violent. So I'm going to read this passage now that draws on a lot of that research about, this is the grandmother in the book whose name is Cora, remembering Registration Day. Nothing had made sense. Fully grown men and women, doctors, salesmen, secretaries, pastors, fathers, mothers, were screaming, shrieking at little children, nearly frothing at the mouth. The newspapers and later the history books would say that the mob was, quote, angry. But when Cora had managed to bring herself to look at their faces, that wasn't what she had seen at all. She'd seen terror, pure and unmistakable, of 2 little Black girls going to the first grade. Hysteria. She remembered Daddy squeezing her hand hard as they approached the stairs to enter the school. A group of skinny white teenagers had stood in his way with their arms folded and sinister grins across their faces. Daddy had trained his eyes on one of the police officers who stood off to the side, like he neither heard nor saw the crowd. When the officer had finally met his gaze, Daddy had shouted, "Well, aren't you going to do something about the people blocking the sidewalk?" The officer had fumbled over and shooed the teenagers away. As they retreated, they had walked backwards so they didn't have to break eye contact with Daddy. Others in the crowd had called Mama and Daddy by their first names, Jewel and George. It had chilled Cora to the bone to hear her parents' first names, words that were so sacred even she couldn't say them, turned into slurs in the mouths of these fanatics. If they knew their names, what else did they know? Did they know her name, her address? Cora had even recognized some of the faces scowling down at her. One of them was the Avon lady who had been syrupy sweet when she had sold Mama her lipstick. Another was the milkman who had always called Mama Mrs. Sterling when he'd come by the house. Daddy had always made it a point to stand straight and tall whenever the milkman stopped by, and now Cora understood why. Another had been Mama's boss when she had worked at the pet milk factory. Now they were beet red with fear and fury that made them look like demons. The pictures that Cora saw later in the newspapers would never capture that redness, just like they couldn't capture her horror. When they got to the top of the stairs, the principal, Mrs. Brent, had been there to meet them. "I don't know whether I can stand all this," Mama had sighed. "I don't know if I can either, Mrs. Sterling," Miss Brent had admitted. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. Then she turned to look at Cora and Jackie Faye and smiled. I guess you've never had so many people talking to you before. It won't be like that when you come back for class. You'll just be here with the other children. Mama had told Cora that the mobs were so swollen because so many of them had come from out of the city limits, several counties out. She said some segregationists had come from all the way from New Jersey and convinced them that a bunch of 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds were working for the communists and the Yankees to invade elementary schools around the city. When Cora had told Mama about the one she recognized and asked how they could believe something so crazy unless they already wanted to, Mama had just sighed and hugged her. I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Wow. You talked about novels giving people a feeling. Can you talk about the feeling you want the reader to have when they reach this part of the book going into the story?
Empathy.
Okay.
Yeah. I want people to feel empathy, and I think that we romanticize the experience of school desegregation. We look at those images and think, oh, look at that brave little girl, and we don't think about the scared little girl, and we don't think later on about the traumatized older woman that comes out of that. There's so much of this that is actually ripped from the headline. So what my grandmother said to the principal, that's literally what she said. I found it in a newspaper article. What the principal says back to her, found that in a newspaper article.
Okay.
What the principal says to my Aunt Jackie, that's literally from the article. My grandmother getting fired from the pet milk company, that actually happened. And there were things that I kind of like my grandfather squeezing Aunt Jackie's hand. He probably did that at some point, I assume. But yeah.
In that kind of situation, it's hard to imagine that it wouldn't happen, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen pictures of them going to school, and there are some pictures where Granddaddy is walking in the back trying to protect them from the mob, so he's not right next to her. But just recently, I went back and found some of the pictures I had seen in the very beginning of my research, because by now I can recognize my grandparents a lot better because,
You don't see them when they're young.
Well, I never met my grandmother at all. She died before any of us were born. And so I'm looking back at these pictures, and I see in front, there's the boy that went to Glenn Elementary. And then I look in the back and I see another little black boy, and he's standing right next to a woman who looks exactly like my grandmother. So I zoom in like, yep, that's my grandmother. I look down at the little boy. That was my Uncle Stevie. He is 3 or 4. Okay. These are his first memories.
Yeah.
Is in this crowd. Yeah.
One thing about this time frame, we also know that Tennessee, Virginia, all over, like not only were these parents this evil and this vicious to a whole generation, but they literally like shut down the school system. Like in many jurisdictions, they literally said there's no more school. We see that today. And a lot of times, how people are looking at our communities, just with no empathy, as you put, no compassion. Like they don't even. And the question is, as a movement, we keep coming back to them to somehow one day see our humanity, to feel our pain, to just somehow, even if we just say, man, you know what we've gone through. And we get some allyship, of course, but not fully. As you're now looking back and you have to then relive some of this pain, right? You're not looking at the articles, you're looking at the pictures, you're seeing it, you're reliving something that took place, some 60 plus years ago. You're now doing your own pain that you go through as you go through life. But when do we get past that? Like, how do we, as a people, help ourselves to move past this trauma on Turtle Island?
Honestly, that is what this book is about. This book is more about intergenerational healing than it is about climate change or school desegregation. Those are things to heal from, sure, but this book is about making the decision to heal on a burning planet. And true intergenerational healing, I don't think we kind of glorify the idea of cycle breakers. I feel like in Black culture,
it's been very trendy,
and also it's very lonely to be a cycle breaker.
Yes,
and I would argue that being a cycle breaker is not actually intergenerational.
Folks never heard that term before. What does that mean?
That means that you have, let's say, you come from a family of alcoholics. Your great-granddaddy, your granddaddy, your daddy, you, all y'all are alcoholics, and you're the one who decides, I'm going to stop. I'm not going to be an alcoholic anymore. You broke the cycle. But when I talk about intergenerational healing, it's like, okay, daddy, okay, granddaddy, let's talk about why we drink. Why would we do this? And we all stop and we all heal together. And so that is what I'm trying to explore in this book, is what does intergenerational healing truly look like? And I think it has to be actually intergenerational.
In writing this book, did you find some healing?
Oh, yeah. It doesn't happen the same way it happens in the book because this is fiction. But in the process of actually doing that research, I was able to, because while this might be true family history, it also functioned like family mystery. These stories were not freely handed down. These were stories I had to fight to try and learn. And every time I would try to ask about it, you could tell you were like touching a nerve, and it was like setting off this eruption. And, as a child, who am I to be asking my granddaddy questions? Like I remember the one time I asked my granddaddy about it, I had seen something on this civil rights documentary, because when I would ask questions, they would be like, go watch a documentary or whatever. And I was like, okay, they're not you. You're not in the documentary. I want to know what happened to you because you're my mama. But anyway, I watched the documentary and went back and told my mama something I had learned. I don't remember what it was. And she was like, well, they shot at the house. And I was like, no, Mama, I didn't know that. How would I know that? Nobody ever told me that. I am 7 and Google doesn't exist. Why would I know that? And so she was like, well, ask your granddaddy about it next time you talk to him. And my granddaddy was a very, he was never like mean or anything to his grandchildren, but he was very like respectable. You know what I mean? Like, when granddaddy walked into a room, you just like automatically like a little bit straighter or something. He just had that air about him.
It's also a defense mechanism.
Yeah, I think it was also, he was just proud, Yeah. And so I get on the phone with him. I was like, Mama said they shot at the house. I was like, all nervous to ask him. And he was like, they didn't shoot at my house. They knew not to shoot at my house. They knew I had guns. Blah, blah, blah. As I learned through doing my research, what I learned was that question was emasculating to him.
Yeah.
And that we talk about the civil rights movement as being really nonviolent. The whole thing wasn't.
Yeah.
School desegregation was not nonviolent, which doesn't mean it was violent. It means that those parents believed in self-defense. So my grandfather absolutely was armed. There were him and several other men who would sit in the living room with guns. Yeah, for sure. And I found articles where they confiscated guns from Black parents. There was a woman who took her child to school and was arrested because she had a knife on her. There's a detail that I include here where my grandparents took my aunt to school and the janitor, because they would let the janitors or the lunch ladies, they were Black. And the janitor went up to my grandparents and was like, if anybody touches your daughter, she won't be the only one who gets hurt because I got a knife. So, which was also kind of cool, because when I went back to Nashville, I went to visit the school and I talked to the janitor who's there now, and he like knew all the history of everything. So it's obviously not the same person, but it was kind of cool to have that continuity.
Plus, janitors get paid a lot of money, so they can retire. It's a filthy job.
Yeah, okay.
I just wanted to put it out there.
I don't think the one who was a janitor in the 50s got paid very well. But
relatively speaking. It takes a lot of money to pick toilet paper out of the places you have to when you're a janitor. So, but I think it's important to really dig in on this. Like you said something just before you did this beautiful reading, where you said, I feel like there's so many people who write books like, all right, one, I think we need to take this moment to say, you are, dang it, Instagram, breaking a cycle. I think in the genre of work that you are in as a creative, as a person who cares about making sure the interior life of people experiencing climate change is not a closed book, you are breaking the cycle of what you just described. You know, I'm from the North because my people left the South, and there's whole, you know, monuments to things that they left, but we didn't have any conversations about it.
Right.
So just by building your own language, building your own worlds and these stories, making sure that the images look like your community, you are in fact opening up a conversation that can be referred to when none of us are here. And that's really powerful. Have you taken a moment to think about that? Like that
Absolutely
you're
not.
doing that? Okay, just wanted to
Not a
check.
single second.
Because
Well, and I'll say, you know, a couple of things. I know I'd love for you to read some more before we close. I would just want to say something you just said there about your grandfather. So I'm a warrior, 100% for my people. I prayed. I know that's my calling. I know how people see me. And particularly around the issue of climate, but other issues. It could be, you know, particularly other Black men who've been killed for just being Black women, trans women, whoever, just being killed for just being who they are.
yeah,
And in this climate space, I've had to go to, because we're both from the South, and so for some reason we obviously love our culture and some aspects of it from our parents. But for me, you said something about your grandfather, about how it is hard for me to go to funerals and to sit there knowing that this person's life was shortened. They got cancer. They got whatever else they got.
yeah.
Because
Asthma, usually asthma before that.
Emphysema, whatever they did because of the toxins. And for me, it's hard. I feel, being transparent, which is what I guess we want in these conversations, I feel sometimes like I'm not the warrior or the man for my community. I feel like when I sit there and I see another coffin of another Black person, or brown person, or indigenous person who's been killed by the industry, I feel sometimes impotent. It's like, man, I gotta fight hard. I mean, and then I come back and you're talking to politicians. And this is me. I mean, obviously I've gone through this. I mean, this is something that, you know, when I was fighting against, you know, from the war in Iraq, and literally my own country labeled me with all kind of threats because I was fighting about, you know, no war, no warming. You feel something when your country is doing things. And it's hard. When you were saying that about your grandfather, it hit me because you want to do more. You just want to grab your whole community and just somehow just lift up all the petrochemicals and all the toxins and just take them out. But you can't.
Sharon Levine talked about it on this couch.
Yeah.
She said, you know, as a person who lots of people want to know what she thinks, you know, why couldn't she take one of those opportunities and get up and go? And she said she wouldn't because of her neighbor, Melvin. That like, Melvin can't leave, so why would I
can't
leave?
So I guess for you, that, you know, obviously you moved back to the South. Is your hope to just help your community, the South, to be better?
So I think what you're talking about is really interesting. And I'm going to go back to the novel again, because I actually didn't get to describe the main action of it. The main action is that my main character, name is Corinne. She is a 20-year-old college student at Oberlin. And she gets radicalized to climate change when her brother dies on an oil boat in 2013. And I say radicalized, not like made aware. She was already aware. She was already an environmental studies major. But that's when she realizes, oh no, it's the oil industry and they're killing people today and in the future. And she is mourning both her brother and the planet that she lives on at the same time. So her climate grief takes on a whole new dimension. And she decides, I need to do something bigger than just like protecting the polar bears or hugging a tree. Like, that's not working for me no more. And so she decides she wants to do something big and risky. And in the process of so doing, she really triggers her grandmother, who is a survivor of school desegregation in Nashville, Tennessee. And it kind of peels back all these scabs in the family. And so that's really what's going on. And what I'm exploring with Corinne is what happens when a Black woman takes on a savior complex, which sounds like what you're describing a little bit. This idea that another bad thing has happened. Oh no, I need to do so much more, and feeling guilty and feeling impotent and all of these things. And what I remember whenever I feel those moments is that Martin Luther King thought he wasn't doing enough.
Yeah.
James Baldwin thought he wasn't doing enough. No one person is going to be able to do enough. There's no such thing as that, because this is neither a sprint or a marathon. This is a relay race.
100%.
And so I find those feelings to be pretty unproductive. But what I wanted to explore here is like, what happens when a Black woman decides I actually am a strong Black woman and I'm going to be a strong Black woman? Like, what happens when you actually have to confront the fact that, no, your back can break too?
I was going to say, doesn't sound like it ends well.
I love the ending.
Well, of course. But just on that theme.
Some people gotta learn fat meat is greasy, you know?
Well, as a vegetarian and sometimes vegan, I'll have to take your word for it.
You ain't never had meat?
It was so many decades ago, I can't say I'm
vegan too.
Perhaps I blocked it out. I don't know.
You've never seen
it wasn't
bacon?
really a great experience for me. Maybe that's part of it.
But, you know, sometimes you just gotta let people learn the hard way.
In the Caribbean, they say, he who don't hear will feel. So I feel like that's where you're going with it. Okay.
But ultimately, again, it's about, I don't want to give away the end of the book, but it's
people gonna have to buy the book to find out.
Healing is a decision, is what I'll say.
Wow.
You want to read the devotion part?
That's a whole word.
So the devotion is actually the acknowledgments. It's not actually a part of the story. But yeah, it's one of my favorite parts of the book, actually. And I think a lot of people don't read the acknowledgments, so I will read them now.
It's like the appetizer.
Yeah. Well, no, it's at the end.
Or the digestive.
It's at the end.
Yeah.
So the book is dedicated to my Uncle Harold, who was not actually my uncle. He's actually my cousin, but he's actually my cousin. But the devotion takes on a different layer. For Malin Jerome Griffith and Mary Clyde Seiler Griffith, known to me as Granddaddy and Grandmama. For their children, Belinda Julia, George Jerome, Jacqueline Faye, and Harvey Stephen, known to me as Mama, Uncle George, Aunt Jackie, and Uncle Stevie. For the Griffiths and the Knalls, the Seilers and the Maxwells, thank you for your stories, your laughs, your auras, so much of what makes me who I am. For the ones walking this earth and the ones guiding us from other planes, I feel you everywhere. To the places that inspired this story, Nashville, Port Gibson, Vicksburg, Oberlin, Winchester, Birmingham, New Orleans. To the places that held me while I wrote it, the Bronx, Harlem, New Orleans again. To the places that made me, Mississippi, my heart, and Birmingham, my soul. To my comrades, the ones who listened to me as I talked through each character, each setting, each storyline. The ones who read early drafts, full and partial. The ones who talked me through my anxieties and imposter syndromes. There are too many of you to name, but you mean more to me than I could ever write. To my informants, the activists and archivists and lawyers and academics and journalists who influenced and challenged my thinking, thank you for your time, grace, and patience. To my accomplices, my agent who believed in me from the very beginning, my editor who saw the vision, and the entire team at Harper Muse, there's so much more to come. To Corinne Jewel Sterling, to Cora May Sterling, and Harold Sterling, thank you for coming. Thank you for choosing me. I will carry you with me forever.
Wow.
Thank you.
We have to ask the usual question. How can people find you and support you beyond buying 10 of your books per person?
They could buy 20 books per person.
That feels right.
Per person?
Yeah, or 25. I mean, follow your heart. Yeah, so both books are available anywhere that you buy books. There's audiobooks. I get that question a lot.
That's awesome.
They can find me on tour. All of my tour dates are up on my website, MarianaEastHeglar.com. I am on Twitter for the time being. I'm also
We all are for the time being.
for the time being. I'm more active on Instagram, and in both places, I'm at Mary Heglar. One of them might have a period in between the Mary and
It's
the
the
Heglar.
IG.
So yeah, it's okay, cool. The IG has a period between the Mary and the Heglar.
You know, Twitter's not that formal. I mean, whatever it's called now.
X.
That.
Yeah. And yeah, that's how you can find me.
Well,
I just have one last question. Well, one thing, thank you
Thank
yes.
for being here. Thank you for reading.
Thanks for writing,
And-
girl.
And writing. and
Thanks for
blessing us.
writing.
What does the future look like?
Oh, child. I don't know. I don't know.
Thank you for owning that truth.
Yeah. It don't feel good right now.
Yeah.
I mean,
What it look like to you?
It feels like a transition.
Yeah.
And it feels like a moment where we have been dependent on things that oppress us, and I think we are breaking those things. I feel like many of us, have loved, quote unquote, America, loved capitalism, loved the things that benefited, even though it destroyed others. And now we're at a moment where those things are too being destroyed. And now we get to actually see a different kind of world where the hypocrisy of this country and others who rely upon the extraction and abuse of people is laid bare. And then many of us who have been trying to explain that now are in a moment where I think we can begin to have a different conversation. So I'm excited about a world where I can connect with my family and friends and who are in the global South and on the continent, in Compton, in Baltimore. I'm excited about a different conversation emerging where, and you can see who's good or bad.
I see.
So I'm excited. I'm excited about that. So I think while the future may seem bleak, and for those who've been counting on this system to be forever, yeah, I mean, I think that this is when we can, those of us who have not been listening to the ancestors, can now hear what they've been telling us forever. And that is simply to go forward in your strength and in your community and be one together.
I love your optimism and I want you to keep it. But I would say nothing has made me feel more hopeless about the future than the fact that we live on a planet with an active and obvious genocide and not a thing has been done about it. So if we can't get it together to stop an 8-month ongoing, not stopping, only getting worse genocide, I don't have a lot of faith in our ability. You know, it doesn't feel like, when I look at Gaza, it doesn't look like the systems of oppression are breaking. It looks like they're getting stronger. And
No, I will, as you know, my story is one in which that is saying when I saw now, I still see now, and I also saw, for instance, when I was at the time, which is not a great career move, I was in the Air Force. I saw then the killing of particularly Black and brown bodies in Iraq over many, many lives. And I remember speaking out, and I'll just take it to a moment. I remember speaking out and then going through that process. I remember in that how I thought when I was alone, I realized one, there were many more people who had the same thought. That was the first thing. When I protested against General Petraeus in the Cannon building, which is still on video, unfortunately, it's forever there. I remember protesting saying when generals lie, people die.
Yeah.
and then was beaten up and they broke my leg. I was on the floor there after they were arresting me, and my leg was literally pointing in one direction. And I never forget in that moment how on 1 second I felt demoralized. I felt like, why am I on this floor with my leg broken? Why am I, and everything's like in slow motion, why am I getting hit? And then out of nowhere, I remember just hearing activists yelling, arrest Bush, not Rev. I just heard that, and then they were just throwing down the hallway. And I just say that moment changed me forever, because I just realized how powerful we are.
Yeah.
Just like even when my leg was broken, being beat by police, but seeing as long as we, to the very end, never stop fighting for justice. And even in this moment, because it's gonna continue on, when I was in college, it was Rwanda. When it was obviously with Iraq, it's now Haiti and Congo and Gaza. Sudan. I just know that as long as there are those of us who are still coming together, we have hope.
I feel like there's some middle ground in the visions that you're both holding, because the crisis and the opportunity are connected. And so there are very real things happening at this very moment that would just take all the life out of your body just to see it, know it, hear it, ask people to recount it to you. But there are also things happening in the same moment because of these things where folks are taking up more strength in their heart, voices that they have not had, stances that don't get filmed. Like in this moment, in these same conflicts that we're talking about, people are throwing down in their places of work and they don't work there anymore. Like that, the thunderous silence of Black women getting felled from places where social justice is king is because they are in those moments without a camera, without any applause, standing up to say wrong is wrong, that lives are worth something. And it's not just Black women, it's allies of every kind, it's women, it's men, it's people of every marginalized identity. And those things happen outside of other folks' view. And I think there's something real and joyful and frankly, in social justice work, addictive about seeing people show up in the gap when it goes wrong. It's why, the idea that we go back to check on each other, we build communities around what healing actually looks like. You build novels and stories and worlds where people have choice. Those are tools towards the future. Because none of us knows what it's actually gonna look like, but we have to put in our effort today. So it's just been incredible to be able to start to dig into that deeper conversation.
Give me the last word.
I will say this. I don't know what none of us actually know.
I was going to say, if you know, right? What is the number, as my grandma would say.
Right, exactly.
You got the number?
So, and I also say that, I might lean a little bit toward a bit of pessimism, and I've been wrong before. I've been proven wrong plenty of times, right? Like, I saw Trump's election come in, but I also thought that he was going to, release a nuke in year one. So, hey.
Yeah. And the 72-minute war that ends everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
fair enough. I mean, there was a 50-50 on that for a long time.
Right. And I feel like I don't necessarily need hope to keep going.
That's right.
It's for me more about paying a debt to previous generations for the price that was paid for my ticket to be here. And the idea that the sacrifices that were made before I got here were made so that I would be on a burning planet. Oh, I'm gonna do something just out of spite now. Like whether it works or not, I'm still gonna try.
And there's the Scorpio.
I suppose,
love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's probably not a better note to end on than that. Obviously, we have our amazing producer, Toronto Loughlin, our amazing producer, Destiny Hodges, our amazing producer, DeWine Cross, myself, Rev Yearwood, and our guest, Annalise Heglar. And this is Foolish Show. Thank you, my sister.
Thank you. Have fun at Pinewoods.